Here at ICLEI since 2014, joined the organization in 2014. I had been working at the Colorado Governor's Energy Office on energy policy, renewable energy policy, and then came over to ICLEI to finish out a big Department of Energy grant that the organization had, and then took the role as executive director January 1 of 2016. This is a picture of some of the local leaders who attended the ICLEI World Congress. We have a gathering, triennial gathering, that happens around the world. This one was in Malmo, Sweden. The next one will be in Sao Paulo, Brazil in June of 2024. So hope that you can come and be a part of that. As I mentioned, global organization. I'm based in Denver. We have in the US folks who are in Arizona. Kaylin Hart from our team is in the area there, and we have some other folks spread across the country. 24 offices. We're now serving about 2,500 or so local governments through this 5-pathway approach. And so, of course, you all are doing this in your communities as well, looking at opportunities for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and making your community more resilient. Looking through a lens of circularity. We call circularity, moving folks away from extract, use, and dispose, to find opportunities to create job creation, to create new businesses and opportunities around resource management, primarily, but I think also around human capital. I feel like there's a lot of slack in our human capital, and it's an opportunity, I think, for all of us to think about ways to help folks who are underemployed or unemployed to have more meaningful engagement in our communities through a circular approach. Nature and health. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we're doing on the nature pathway and some of the opportunities we'll have this year for learning cohorts, both in circularity and in nature. And of course, using the lens of equity as a very cross-cutting theme as we approach local government sustainability. This is probably a familiar sort of plan, do, check, act kind of standard operating procedure that all of you have. We think about analysis being the first step, helping folks to develop a baseline, whether it be a baseline of greenhouse gas emissions or a climate risk and vulnerability assessment, a nature assessment, a local biodiversity assessment. We're going to be doing more of those this year, then taking some actions and how to accelerate that action. You're probably familiar, those of you that are working with greenhouse gas inventories, you're probably familiar with the U.S. Community Protocol. Wanted to mention that we have been doing an update to the U.S. Community Protocol. This is the accounting standard by which local and regional governments in the U.S. Do their greenhouse gas accounting and reporting. And so we've heard two things from communities. We've heard folks say the protocol is too complex, inventories take too long, we don't want to spend that much time working on our inventory. Can you streamline and simplify? And so we have done that. And then we've also heard communities who have said, great, love the greenhouse gas inventory, would also like to look at other aspects of baseline analysis in order to develop and redevelop, update our climate action plans around adaptation, around equity, and also many folks looking at things like scope 3 emissions, some work that we're doing on 24/7 carbon-free accounting. I see that there was a hand raised. Ryan, do you want to jump in? I can't see the chat, so somebody can read me the chat, or you can just
Thank you,
say
Angie.
hello.
I don't see anything in the chat. I thought I raised my hand just in case you could see that. So thank you. I'm just curious. I don't know if, I'm sure you have a lot of slides and you don't want to go into depth on this, but I'm curious about, I know ICLE is governments, but you know, the US SEC obviously has a draft rule for companies to disclose greenhouse gas. I'm just curious for your top line, how this update that you're mentioning here interfaces with that or acknowledges that or does or doesn't. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, thanks for the question. Certainly a greenhouse gas inventory, target or mitigation strategies can be and is now voluntarily reported by many cities. There are a couple of different voluntary reporting platforms, one that CDP and ICLE partner on, the CDP ICLE track. That opportunity to report is actually open currently. I believe the deadline is coming in June for cities, counties, and regions to report on all of their sustainability points of interest. One of the things that we're seeing coming out of ICLE Canada, there in Canada is quite a movement of local governments using their budget process as an opportunity to raise the visibility of their climate action plan. City of Vancouver, for example, now when they release their budget every year, they do it in concert with a climate action plan overlay. And so it's this, ESG, environmental, social, and governance kind of approach, like many community or corporations are taking. And then through the CDP ICLE track, you'll now be able to report through the Task Force for Climate Disclosure, TCFD. So yes, those things are definitely coming. And one of the things that we're working on from a cohort learning standpoint. So I'll touch a little bit more on that in just a moment, but thanks again for the question. So the project that we have going right now with the US Community Protocol update, we have a group of master's students who are doing a capstone for us. They're going to be building in more guidance around equity and adaptation in the US Community Protocol Plus. But meanwhile, we have simplified and streamlined the emissions profile to what we're calling US Community Protocol Dash. So we now have the ability to provide some guidance to local governments who would like to focus on generally the three things that are the greatest drivers of greenhouse gas emissions in your community. And those are transportation related emissions, energy related emissions associated with commercial and residential buildings, in some communities, industrial, but in most communities, commercial and residential. And then also what is the current rate of decarbonization on your electricity grid. So Dash now, our goal here was to have an emissions profile in a day that you could actually go out to a public data source like Google's Environmental Insight Explorer and grab some information from the Insight Explorer specifically for your community. The Google EIE or Environmental Insight Explorer tool has data for every county in the United States and for local governments that are 25,000 or more in population. So sorry for the folks on the call. I know there are some smaller communities on the call who may not yet have the Google EIE data, but do know that it is available at the county level, and at the very least, we could help you to maybe downscale some data from that level. So I also wanted to mention that we have an online tool. This is available on the ICLE website to anyone who visits the website. It's a collection of climate action plans, sustainability plans, energy plans, ordinances, that sort of thing. So do feel free to search the map there. Hopefully we have a link to the actual plan itself, so you can see kind of how some of your peers across the country are approaching some of these issues like you are. mentioned the resilience work and doing more around climate adaptation in the U.S. Community Protocol. We know that trees are a very important asset in our communities. They do two things, many things, but two of the things are reduce greenhouse gas emissions through potential carbon sequestration. They also are very important in terms of addressing heat in our community. And so we've been doing some work with Google on a tree canopy analysis in Pittsburgh, and we'll be sharing out the results of that, hopefully some new data sets and some new tools that would be available to any community for your use. And I see there's a chat. Let me see. Oh, okay. It's just Anne reminding you all to please share your questions in the chat. Okay, so a little bit about the approach that we've taken recently with the communities that we're working with at ICLEI. We have always been a very large tent organization, meeting communities wherever they are at in their sustainability and climate journey. And so if a community, had a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 2% in the next 20 years, by golly, we supported that goal. A couple of years ago in 2020, ICLEI at the global level with World Resources Institute and the World Wildlife Federation came up with a new methodology to create science-based targets for cities and counties, other local governments. A science-based target essentially means at what level of greenhouse gas reduction does your community need to achieve by 2030 in order to be on track to be zero emissions by 2050, which is what is in line with a 1.5 degrees increase in temperature by mid-century. So these science-based targets are easy for us to calculate. At ICLEI, we have a calculator to do this. If you have a recent greenhouse gas inventory, something that's 2018 or 19 or newer, we can help you to set that target and then do this wedge analysis to help you determine what are the high impact actions that your community could take in order to be on track for a 2030 science-based target. Let me see if there's any. Okay, Ryan. Hi, Ryan again. Is the Google tree canopy data available to cities of all sizes? Good question. It is probably also going to be a 25,000 cutoff, but let me find out about that. We do have quite a bit of county level data on trees that's also available through the ICLEI website. And so I would encourage you at the least to check out the county level data and see if that's useful. And here it is. The tool is called the Land Emissions and Removals Navigator. This is the Learn tool. Again, it's free, available on the ICLEI website to anyone who would like to use it. You can use Learn to see what sort of changes have occurred in your community. These are often disturbances, insects, wildfire, that sort of thing, and will give you a sense of how trees and forests are contributing to reductions in greenhouse gas emissions at the county or city level. If you are a city and you have some high resolution data, some GIS data, we can also show you how to incorporate that into the Learn tool to have a more precise look at your city emissions. Continuing to do a lot on climate adaptation. We are now offering communities climate conditions reports, workshops, climate vulnerability assessments, and climate adaptation plans. We are currently doing a cohort on sustainability, just sustainability planning in general, and also one on resilience. So I'll be happy to provide some links to check out those types of cohort offerings. The cohorts are generally available to ICLEI members, although we do have some opportunities that are available broadly. And the cohort is a structured learning opportunity for you to step through the process of, for example, creating a climate conditions report, doing a greenhouse gas inventory, looking at nature and trees. And then there's a deliverable or a concrete outcome at the conclusion of the learning cohort. These generally last about 6 to 8 months. And the nice thing about them, I think, is that you, in addition to having this facilitated learning experience, you're also connecting with your peers, perhaps locally, perhaps across the country.
Quick question, Angie.
Yeah.
If you could go back to the previous slide, can you explain, actually go to the next one.
The wedge?
Oh, no, go the other direction.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. As far as a climate conditions report, can you explain exactly what that is and how that differs from maybe an assessment or some of the plans?
Yes, exactly. Thanks for the question. So the climate conditions report is going to provide an analysis of what are, based on current climate models, what are the projected impacts associated with climate change for your community? So it's just information providing, if you will.
So, so it basically kind of tees up a community to provide that backing of why a climate action report or climate adaptation plan is necessary, for the community.
Yes, a great starting point in that regard, and you've characterized it very well. The next step would be a climate risk and vulnerability assessment. So at this juncture, we would move from, okay, these are the conditions and the expected conditions on the ground, to what are the vulnerable systems and populations in the community? What are the systems and populations that are at risk? And what is the community's ability to adapt to that risk? So sort of taking that climate conditions report now to the next level, to say where are the risks and vulnerabilities, and how would we potentially address those? The third step then being a climate action plan, a climate adaptation plan, potentially as part of your climate action plan or potentially as a standalone plan. Now we're getting into working with the community, understanding community assets, community challenges and vulnerabilities, stakeholder engagement, and putting some strategies into place. So these things can all build on one another.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's just make sure that, okay, Shelley's got a question. Yes, the biggest source of carbon emissions after transportation, energy. Mm-hmm. How do we advise cities with decarbonization goals in states like Arizona that are subject to energy produced by vertically integrated monopolies like TEP and APS, which in our case, yep. Well, here I sit in Colorado. We recognize that the success of local and regional governments is absolutely, hand in hand with the work that the utilities and other players in your community, state government, et cetera, state government setting regulations on utilities and utilities coming up with their programs. So it's got to work in concert. The approach that has been successful here in Colorado is a group of local governments came together and they formed what they call CC4CA, which is Colorado Communities for Climate Action. And it's essentially them coming together to pool their lobbying power. ICLEI is a 501c3. We're an education nonprofit. We don't lobby. We don't advocate for any candidate for office or any particular ballot initiative or that sort of thing. But of course, local governments do have the ability to lobby at state government level and national government level and so forth. So with CC4CA, what they decided to do was, as local governments in Colorado come together, pool their lobbying resources, and they once a year set an agenda for advocacy work that they wish to do at the state capitol in Denver. They only do it by consensus, so they will only lobby for bills that the entire consortium has signed off on. And they've been extremely successful in using that sort of lever as a group of local governments going to the state legislature and speaking with one voice. And so that might be, one opportunity to think about how to influence where you have some resistance from utilities and from state policy that's maybe holding you back.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Good. Great, Shelley. Good. So being on a call here with ASU, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about city-university collaboration and cohorts. This is one of the very engaging and exciting cohort work that we do. Started with the University of Indiana, actually, who approached us several years ago asking about using the ClearPath tool to train their students to do greenhouse gas inventories. And it really grew into a nice partnership where ICLEI provided the greenhouse gas emissions management tool, as well as some technical assistance, some support, again, through that sort of facilitated cohort learning. The students who participated were assigned to a local government, and they worked directly with the local government under the guidance of course, their university faculty and staff and ICLEI staff, and would come out of the cohort with a completed greenhouse gas inventory for that local government. So it was a nice benefit to local governments in the state in getting that kind of support. And of course, it was a great hands-on learning opportunity for the students who, as we know, always appreciate having something tangible, real-world experience to work on. So it has grown from there. And we've done cohorts with students on greenhouse gas inventories, climate action plans, sustainability plans, and so on. We've also had students who have come to us and done internships and capstone projects, as I mentioned earlier. So we really enjoy opportunities to work in that regard. I also wanted to mention the Sustainable Development Goals, because I know this is also an area that ASU has worked in. We provided a learning cohort opportunity, an SDG Cities Challenge. These were the organizations, the local governments, cities and counties that participated in that cohort. We provided them with some one-on-one technical support, talked about what are the sustainable development goals, how would you sort of localize that for your community. And then we helped them to identify one of the sustainable development goals that they could take back to their city or county and work on at a more detailed level of engagement. Our nature work, as I mentioned, we're going to be rolling out some new tools and a cohort that will focus on creating local biodiversity assessments and looking at nature as a both adaptation and climate mitigation strategy. This document is available on our website. We did some interviews, about 60 or so communities we spoke with in 2022. to understand where were they getting stuck and what areas in like getting our utility to work with us or getting state policy aligned. But a lot of what we found was that there was a disconnect at the city and county level, oftentimes between the work that the sustainability and climate team is doing and the work that's happening in the budget and procurement offices. And so right now we are helping 8 communities to step through a process that includes the chief budget officer, the chief procurement officer, and the chief sustainability officer. And those folks are all they're all working together to evaluate one of the sustainability or climate action plan strategies and come up with a budget and procurement scope for that particular strategy. This spectrum of readiness is something that might be helpful as you're talking with internal stakeholders and kind of assessing what your needs are internally and externally. This is something that, again, came out of those interviews with about 60 or so communities. We have a stock take for climate emergency toolkit. Happy to share this. Would love for all of you in your communities to think about doing a stock take exercise. We included a youth contingency to help us to develop it along with the Earth Day network. And it's just a guide for how you can sit down with your community, talk about the Paris Agreement and global climate goals, and discuss the needs and opportunities in your community and how it can feed up into that global process. I wanted to mention the Cities Forward work. I mentioned that we had the City Summit of the Americas, which was a meeting of the U.S. Department of State, the State Department, Western Hemisphere Affairs, brought folks from Latin America and Caribbean to Denver, as well as across the U.S. and Canada. It was a 2-day conference. At the conference, they announced the kickoff of the Cities Forward program. ICLEI USA is the PI, the principal investigator or the prime organizer of the Cities Forward initiative. We were selected by the State Department along with our teammates, Resilient Cities Catalyst, the Institute of the Americas, and the ICLEI offices in Latin America. And so we have an application open now for US cities as well as cities in Latin America and the Caribbean. The applications are due on June 15th. If your city or county would like to participate in the program, I really encourage you to check it out. It will pair 12 US local governments with 12 Latin American and Caribbean local governments for some exchange, dialogue, and so forth. There will be some focus on adaptation. There will also be a focus on sustainable technology solutions. So check that out. Would love to have you apply. I also want to mention the EPA Climate Pollution Reduction Grants. This I know is taking up a lot of time for those of you that are in regions that will receive this funding. Another great opportunity at your doorstep. I really like this one because you don't have to compete for it. There's no matching funds required. And participating in the program unlocks additional funds for implementation through the next round of EPA climate pollution reduction funding. At ICLEI, we're already working with a couple of regions who are receiving the $1 million grant. They've asked us to do their regional greenhouse gas inventory, help them set their targets and mitigation strategies. So if you hear of folks who are looking for some support, thank you in advance for keeping us in mind. And that's it for me.